They're laughing because they still believe ignorance is authority. The words echoed across the marble exhibition hall, spoken by an elderly collector standing beside me. I answered with silence. Across the room, more than 200 guests watched as Victor Harlan, the most feared antique dealer in Eastbridge, held an ancient bronze mirror between white-gloved fingers. Its dark surface reflected nothing. To everyone else, it looked worthless. Victor smiled with practiced arrogance. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced into the microphone, "our anonymous seller claims this forgotten piece deserves a place in today's Imperial Collection auction." Laughter rippled through the audience. Someone whispered loudly enough for everyone to hear, "She must have found it at a flea market." Another voice followed, "Even the cleaning staff has better taste." The woman standing beside me never reacted. Linyu. Unknown. Plain gray coat. No expensive jewelry. No famous family. Only a pair of calm eyes that seemed to absorb every detail inside the room. She slowly looked toward me. "Will you speak?" Her voice barely rose above a whisper. I smiled. No. That single word surprised her more than the crowd. I had spent 12 years restoring forgotten relics, studying civilizations that disappeared before written history, and building my reputation as an authentication consultant behind closed doors. Nobody in this hall knew my face. They only knew Victor. If I revealed what I had seen, nothing would change. Not yet. Victor lifted the mirror higher. The bronze composition is modern. He tapped its edge. The carvings are artificial. Another tap. The corrosion is chemically accelerated. The audience nodded along. He sounded convincing. He always did. Then came the sentence that would decide everything. "This object," he paused dramatically, "is an imitation." Thunderous applause erupted. The security staff moved toward Linyu. "The auction does not permit fraudulent submissions," one guard said. "You'll need to leave." She lowered her head slightly. "I understand." No anger. No pleading. No argument. She simply accepted the humiliation. Victor laughed. "Take your souvenir home." People chuckled as cameras flashed. News reporters eagerly captured the disgrace of another amateur dreaming about hidden treasures. I looked once more at the mirror. Not its frame. Not its carvings. The reflection. Or rather, the absence of one. Every polished object in the hall reflected the crystal chandeliers overhead. The mirror reflected only darkness. Most people considered that a flaw. I knew better. Years earlier, while translating fragmented manuscripts from an abandoned monastery in western China, I had discovered references to artifacts known as the Heavenly Witnesses, objects that concealed themselves from ordinary perception. Their true nature awakened only under specific conditions. The final missing condition would occur tonight, exactly 3 hours from now. Linyu quietly picked up the wooden box that had carried the mirror. As she turned to leave, Victor called after her. "Next time, at least forge something believable." Laughter followed her to the doors. She never looked back. Neither did I. "You're leaving?" asked Eleanor Brooks, one of the museum trustees. "The main auction hasn't even started. I've already seen today's most valuable lot." She frowned. "You mean the Imperial Jade Seal?" "No." I glanced toward the empty entrance where Linyu had disappeared. The one everyone just rejected. Outside, cold autumn rain covered the stone staircase. Linyu stood beneath the museum awning. She wasn't crying. She simply watched raindrops strike the pavement. I walked beside her. "You expected this." She looked at me without surprise. "I expected ridicule. But not defeat." "No." A faint smile appeared. "Defeat requires certainty." Interesting answer. "You know something. So do you." For several seconds neither of us spoke. The city traffic hummed around us. Finally, she opened the wooden box again. The bronze mirror rested inside. Its surface remained perfectly black. "You saw it." "I saw enough." "You didn't tell them." "They weren't ready to listen." She closed the lid. "Good. Because if you had..." She stopped herself. "If I had, you would have changed tonight." Before I could ask what she meant, a black luxury sedan stopped beside the curb. A young assistant rushed out. "Mr. Graves." I recognized him immediately. Daniel Cross, personal secretary to billionaire collector Adrian Graves. He was breathing hard. "We've been searching everywhere. For me. For you and her." He stared nervously at Linyu. "Chairman Graves requests your immediate presence." "Why?" Daniel swallowed. "Something impossible just happened." My pulse slowed instead of quickening. The moment had arrived. "What happened?" The Imperial Observatory contacted the museum. He hesitated. The bronze mirror started glowing. The private vault beneath Graves International was unlike any museum storage facility. No windows, steel walls, humidity-controlled chambers. Only 7 people had access. Victor Harlan was already inside when we arrived. His confidence had vanished. Sweat darkened his collar. The glow stopped, he insisted. It was probably chemical residue. Nobody answered him. On the reinforced examination table lay the same mirror. Except it wasn't the same anymore. Golden lines now spread beneath the bronze surface like veins beneath skin. Every few seconds another ancient symbol appeared before fading again. Professor Martin Shaw adjusted his glasses. I've authenticated artifacts for 40 years. I have no explanation. Victor forced a laugh. Some kind of hidden projection. No electricity, another expert replied. No heat source. No electronics. Silence. Then Adrian Graves entered. Everyone stood. He ignored Victor completely. Instead, he walked directly toward Linyu. You are the owner? Yes. What price? She calmly answered. It isn't for sale. Victor almost shouted. Chairman Graves, don't encourage this absurdity. Graves slowly turned. I wasn't speaking to you. The room froze. Victor had built his empire partly through Graves' patronage. Being dismissed publicly was unthinkable. Graves looked back at Linyu. If money isn't enough, what are you seeking? She answered without hesitation. The truth. Those 2 words changed the atmosphere completely. Graves nodded once. I can respect that. I watched the mirror again. The symbols were increasing, exactly as described in the monastery records. The first awakening. Soon, the second stage would begin. And when it did, every expert in this room would discover that history itself had been incomplete. Victor slammed both hands onto the examination table. This is theater. His voice echoed through the vault. A clever chemical reaction doesn't rewrite centuries of archaeology. Professor Shaw didn't answer immediately. Instead, he leaned closer to the mirror. One trembling finger hovered over the newly formed golden characters, but stopped short of touching them. They're changing, he whispered. No engraving tool leaves marks that rearrange themselves. Victor scoffed. Then it's heat expansion. No. I finally spoke. Every face turned toward me. Victor narrowed his eyes. And who exactly are you? A conservator. Then stay in your lane. His contempt drew a few uneasy glances, but I ignored him. The mirror pulsed again. The darkness covering its surface seemed to peel away like mist, revealing an impossibly smooth layer beneath. Linyu watched without blinking. She looked less surprised than relieved, as if she had been waiting for confirmation rather than discovery. Adrian Graves noticed it too. You've seen this before. She shook her head. I've seen enough to know it would happen. Victor laughed sharply. Enough riddles. He pointed directly at her. You're manipulating everyone. Prove it. She met his gaze with remarkable calm. I don't need to. You already will. Her certainty unsettled the room far more than anger could have. A technician suddenly gasped. The spectrum scanner. Everyone turned. The monitor connected to the laboratory equipment displayed numbers racing beyond their calibrated limits. Impossible, the technician muttered. The alloy doesn't match bronze. Professor Shaw stepped forward. What does it match? The technician swallowed. Nothing in the database. Silence settled like heavy snow. Victor's expression tightened. This equipment is malfunctioning. It was calibrated this morning. Another specialist replied. Adrian folded his arms. Continue testing. The next hour became a storm of disbelief. X-ray imaging revealed structures inside the mirror that resembled neither casting nor forging. Microscopic analysis found no evidence of modern tooling. Carbon residue contradicted every known manufacturing method. Each result pushed Victor further into the corner he had built for himself. Yet he refused to retreat. I reject every one of these findings. Professor Shaw looked exhausted. Science doesn't require your approval. Victor turned toward Adrian. If this woman fabricated one miracle, she'll fabricate another. Linyu quietly closed the wooden box. I'm leaving. Adrian frowned. The examination isn't finished. It doesn't matter. She looked toward me. It has already chosen. A strange chill ran through me. Before I could ask what she meant, every light inside the vault flickered. Once, twice, then darkness. Emergency generators failed to activate. Only the mirror remained visible. Its golden symbols floated above the surface like living fire. Someone screamed. Another person stumbled backward. The air itself felt heavier. Ancient. Timeless. The floating symbols gathered into a single vertical line before bursting outward in a silent wave. The lights instantly returned. Every computer restarted. Every scanner reset. Every security lock beeped simultaneously. Then dozens of phones began ringing at once. Daniel answered first. His face drained of color. What? He listened for several seconds. Repeat that. Across the room, another assistant received a different call. Then another. Within moments, everyone seemed to be speaking at once. The National Museum? International Heritage Council? London? Tokyo? Impossible. Adrian raised one hand. Enough. Silence returned. Daniel inhaled deeply. Chairman, the live security footage from the museum leaked online. And it captured the mirror changing. Victor snorted. So, Daniel looked directly at him. It has already been viewed over 80 million times. Nobody moved. He continued. The world's largest collectors are demanding an emergency auction. Professor Shaw blinked. Tonight, they're already boarding private flights. Victor forced another laugh, but it sounded hollow. This is media hysteria. Daniel shook his head. No. He looked toward Adrian. 3 sovereign museums have each submitted preliminary offers. Without authentication? Yes. Amounts. Daniel hesitated. The highest is $1.3 billion. The room erupted. Victor staggered backward until he hit the wall. That's insane. No artifact sells for. Daniel interrupted quietly. That was the opening offer. Adrian slowly looked at Linyu. You still refuse to sell? She rested one hand on the closed wooden box. I haven't decided. Victor's breathing became uneven. He lunged toward the table. That mirror belongs in my gallery. Security intercepted him before he reached it. It was submitted through my auction house. It was rejected through your auction house, Adrian replied coldly. You declared it worthless. Victor froze. The words echoed through the silent vault. Declared it worthless. Those 4 words had become a chain around his own neck. If the artifact proved genuine, every client who had trusted his expertise would question decades of appraisals. His empire had been built on certainty. Tonight, certainty had betrayed him. He looked desperately around the room. Back me up. Nobody spoke. Not one expert. Not one collector. Not even his own assistants. For the first time in years, Victor stood completely alone. Linyu picked up the wooden box. We're done here. She walked toward the exit. As I followed beside her, Adrian called after us. The emergency auction begins in 2 hours. She paused without turning around. Then prepare a larger haul. Why? Because by the time the truth finishes revealing itself, no building in this city will be large enough. I glanced once more at Victor. He wasn't watching us anymore. He was staring at the empty examination table where the mirror had rested. Not with greed. With fear. Deep inside, he already understood something his pride refused to admit. He hadn't merely insulted an unknown seller. He had publicly declared history itself to be fake. And history was about to answer. The emergency auction hall had never been designed for panic. Yet panic arrived before dawn. Satellite trucks lined the streets outside Graves International. Luxury sedans blocked entire intersections. Police officers struggled to contain crowds of journalists, collectors, investors, professors, and curious spectators who had flooded the district after the impossible footage spread across every major platform. Inside the building, the atmosphere was even worse. Every conversation ended with the same question. What exactly is that mirror? Nobody had an answer. I stood near the rear entrance, watching technicians install additional security barriers around the exhibition platform. Linyu remained remarkably calm. She wasn't admiring the attention. She wasn't enjoying Victor's humiliation. She simply sat alone, drinking tea as though the world outside had nothing to do with her. That was the first thing I had noticed about her. She never chased victory. She only waited for truth. Daniel hurried toward us. Chairman Graves has doubled security. Linyu nodded. He should triple it. Daniel blinked. You expected trouble? I expect greed. His expression immediately changed. I'll inform him. As he disappeared into the crowd, I quietly asked. You knew the auction would happen. I knew people would reveal themselves. How? She looked toward the stage instead of answering. Heaven never hides treasures. It hides hearts. Across the hall, Victor Harlan was fighting to keep control of what remained of his reputation. This entire event is irresponsible. He cornered several museum directors. No scientific consensus exists. One director sighed. Victor, the footage speaks for itself. It proves nothing. It proved enough for billionaires to fly across continents overnight. Victor clenched his jaw. They're acting on emotion. No. The director lowered his voice. They're acting because they fear someone else may discover the truth first. Fear. That single emotion had always fueled the antique market. Fear of missing history. Fear of buying a fake. Fear of another collector owning something priceless. Tonight, all three fears had merged into one. Victor suddenly noticed me watching. He strode across the hall. You. I remember your face. I remained silent. You encouraged her. No. I simply refused to stop her. His eyes narrowed. So you admit you're involved. I restored damaged history. I never damaged it. Victor leaned closer. Whatever game you're playing, it ends tonight. I smiled faintly. It already began yesterday. His face darkened. Before he could answer, Adrian's voice echoed through the hall. Everyone, please take your seats. The auction was beginning. More than 600 guests filled the expanded auditorium. Thousands more watched through encrypted international broadcasts. The bronze mirror rested alone beneath a transparent security enclosure. Its surface had returned to darkness. People whispered nervously. Did it stop working? Was it fake after all? Maybe yesterday was staged. Victor visibly relaxed. There, he whispered to the man beside him. I told you. Then Lin Yu slowly stood. Without asking permission, she walked onto the stage. Security instinctively moved forward. Adrian raised one hand. Let her. She stopped beside the display case. For several long seconds, she simply looked at the mirror. Then she spoke. I have no interest in convincing anyone. Her voice remained gentle. If you believe it's worthless, please leave. Laughter erupted. Victor couldn't resist. You finally admit defeat. Lin Yu turned toward him. No. I'm offering freedom. Freedom from making the most expensive mistake of your life. The laughter faded. Nobody left. Not one person. Human curiosity was stronger than pride. Lin Yu nodded slightly. I thought so. She reached toward the security enclosure. The guards looked at Adrian. He quietly unlocked it himself. The room fell completely silent. She lifted the mirror. The bronze surface reflected nothing. Again, nothing. She turned it toward the audience. Tell me what you see. Darkness. A defect. An empty mirror. Different voices answered. She nodded. Exactly. Then she looked directly at me. For 12 years. He searched for the missing sentence. Every head turned toward me. Victor frowned. What sentence? I slowly walked onto the stage. Lin Yu carefully handed me the mirror. The metal felt strangely warm. Would you like to explain? She asked. I nodded. Years earlier, while translating damaged monastery scrolls, I had discovered repeated references to an object called the Heavenly Witness. Unfortunately, every surviving manuscript ended with the same missing paragraph. Without that final section, nothing made sense. Until last night. I raised the mirror slightly. The missing sentence wasn't lost. It was waiting. Professor Shaw stood. What do you mean? The object itself remembers. Confused murmurs spread through the hall. Victor laughed loudly. Ridiculous. I ignored him. The inscriptions appearing last night weren't decoration. They were restoring missing history. The audience fell quiet again. Even skeptics listened. Because despite how impossible my words sounded, the mirror already existed. Reality had become stranger than theory. Victor stepped onto the stage without invitation. Enough. He pointed toward the mirror in my hands. Stories are not evidence. Correct, I replied. Then stop telling them. I wasn't. His confidence returned as he addressed the audience. Ladies and gentlemen, mythology has always surrounded valuable artifacts. That doesn't make mythology real. Several collectors nodded cautiously. He sensed the shift immediately. This entire spectacle depends on one impossible assumption. He looked directly at Lin Yu. That she somehow possesses knowledge unavailable to every recognized expert on Earth. Lin Yu answered calmly. I never claimed that. You implied it. No. I simply refused to argue with people who had already decided. The simplicity of her answer unsettled him. He changed tactics. If you're so certain, answer one question. What question? Where did you find the mirror? Silence. The audience leaned forward. Lin Yu smiled almost imperceptibly. I didn't. Victor blinked. What? It found me. The hall erupted into whispers. Victor laughed triumphantly. There. She's abandoned reality. I quietly watched him. He still believed the greatest danger came from mystery. He didn't realize it came from certainty. Daniel suddenly rushed toward Adrian carrying a tablet. His face looked pale. Chairman. What now? The Heritage Verification Network just updated. So, Daniel swallowed. They've officially withdrawn every authentication certificate ever issued under Victor Harlan's personal authority. The room froze. Victor stared at him. What did you say? They're launching emergency reviews. Based on one artifact. Daniel shook his head. No. Based on the possibility that your evaluation standards may be fundamentally unreliable. Victor's face lost all color. 30 years. 3 decades of authority. Questioned in a single announcement. He grabbed the tablet violently. This can't happen. It already has. Across the auditorium, dozens of collectors quietly opened their phones. Some immediately canceled pending purchases from Victor's galleries. Others instructed assistants to freeze ongoing transactions. The financial bleeding had begun. Nobody attacked him. Nobody accused him. People simply stopped trusting him. That was enough. Victor looked around desperately. Listen to me. I'm still the world's leading expert. No one answered. His own silence became heavier than anyone else's words. Then the mirror vibrated gently in my hands. Not violently. Not dramatically. Just enough for me to feel it. Lin Yu looked toward the ceiling. It's beginning. Professor Shaw whispered. What is? Instead of answering, she walked toward the enormous skylight above the auction stage. Clouds drifted apart. Moonlight poured into the hall. The silver beam struck the mirror. For one breathtaking instant, the black surface became perfectly clear. Not reflective. Transparent. Inside it, everyone saw moving images. Ancient craftsmen. Forgotten emperors. Collapsed temples. Rivers flowing through cities erased from every history book. Nobody breathed. Nobody spoke. It wasn't a recording. It wasn't a projection. It felt like memory itself had awakened. An elderly historian suddenly burst into tears. I know that seal. It disappeared 1,500 years ago. Another scholar whispered. Those robes. They were only mentioned in destroyed manuscripts. Professor Shaw's knees nearly gave way. My entire career was incomplete. Victor stared at the impossible visions with trembling eyes. His lips moved. No, this can't. For the first time since I had met him, he looked like a man confronting the collapse of his own identity. And the auction had not even started yet. Moonlight continued to pour through the skylight, but the visions inside the mirror slowly dissolved into darkness once again. No applause followed. No excited shouting. Only silence. It was the silence of hundreds of people realizing that everything they believed about history might be wrong. Then someone stood. An elderly woman with silver hair slowly removed the identification badge hanging from her neck. I owe someone an apology. I followed her. She crossed the stage, stopping before Lin Yu. I dismissed your submission yesterday without even examining it. She bowed deeply. I judged your appearance instead of your evidence. Lin Yu gently shook her head. You judged what you had been taught to judge. That doesn't excuse me. No, it doesn't. The old historian accepted the answer without protest. She stepped aside. One after another, other experts followed. Not because Lin Yu demanded it, because their own consciences did. Victor watched in disbelief. For decades, these same people had defended his every opinion. Now they were quietly distancing themselves without a single accusation. He suddenly shouted, "Stop!" The entire hall froze. Have all of you lost your minds? He pointed toward the mirror. You've seen something impossible and immediately abandoned reason. Professor Shaw looked at him with genuine sadness. No, Victor. We abandoned arrogance. The word struck harder than any insult. Victor laughed bitterly. So now everyone becomes a philosopher? No. Professor Shaw stepped closer. We simply remembered what scholarship requires. What? The courage to admit we were wrong. Victor's breathing became uneven. His empire had never been built solely on knowledge. It had been built on certainty, and certainty was collapsing in front of the entire world. Meanwhile, Adrian Graves quietly approached me. I need to ask you something. What is it? If the mirror truly preserves forgotten history, what else exists? I looked toward Lin Yu. She answered before I could. Questions. Adrian frowned. I expected another mysterious answer. It isn't mysterious. She folded her hands calmly. The greatest treasure isn't an artifact. It's the question that survives after certainty dies. He smiled faintly. I finally understand why you refused to sell. She didn't answer. Because there was nothing left to explain. News spread faster than anyone anticipated. Within an hour, international academic organizations requested access to the mirror. Governments contacted Adrian's office. Universities offered unlimited research funding. Private collectors increased their bids. 1.5 billion, 2 billion, 2.7 billion. The numbers climbed so quickly that nobody bothered reacting anymore. Money had become irrelevant. The mirror had already surpassed wealth. It promised something far rarer. Truth. Daniel hurried across the stage carrying another stack of documents. Chairman. Adrian looked up. Another offer? No. Worse. He handed him several printed reports. The insurance companies. What about them? They've suspended coverage for every major artifact authenticated solely through Victor Harlan's evaluations. Victor snatched the papers before Adrian could respond. His hands shook violently. No. This is temporary. Daniel remained silent. It has to be. Nobody contradicted him. Nobody agreed either. Silence became its own verdict. As the crowd reorganized for the formal bidding session, I noticed a young woman standing alone near the back wall. She hadn't spoken all evening. She wasn't a collector, nor a journalist. She wore simple clothes and carried a worn leather notebook. Yet she never looked at the mirror. She watched Linyu. Carefully, patiently. When our eyes met, she lowered her notebook. You noticed? I notice everyone who doesn't chase the obvious. A faint smile appeared. My name is May. Researcher. Archivist. Independent. She nodded. I've been searching for heaven's sight. I felt my heartbeat slow. Very few people even knew the phrase. You've heard of it? I've spent 9 years following fragments. And I always arrive too late. She glanced toward Linyu. Until tonight. Before I could ask another question, May quietly handed me a folded sheet of paper. Read it later. What is it? A warning. She disappeared into the crowd before I could stop her. I unfolded the paper only enough to glimpse one sentence written in elegant black ink. The mirror is only the first key. Nothing more. No signature. No explanation. I slipped it into my pocket. Linyu had noticed. You trust her? I don't know. But she's afraid. Good. Her answer surprised me. You wanted her to be afraid? No. I wanted her to understand the cost of knowledge. She looked toward the mirror again. Most people think discovering truth is a reward. It isn't. It's responsibility. The auction finally began. The first bid echoed through the hall. 3 billion. No hesitation. Another collector immediately responded. 3.4. 3.8. 4. The numbers no longer sounded real. Each new offer drew gasps from the audience. Victor stood motionless. Every increase reminded him of the sentence he had spoken the previous day. This object is an imitation. The recording had already spread across every major news network. His own words had become evidence against him. No rival had destroyed his reputation. His own confidence had. Exactly as Linyu had predicted. Halfway through the bidding, an unexpected announcement interrupted everything. Daniel stepped onto the stage holding his phone. Chairman. Adrian frowned. We're in the middle of an auction. I know, but this can't wait. He switched the giant screen behind the stage to a live financial broadcast. A reporter spoke rapidly. We have breaking news. Harlan Antiquities has entered emergency trading suspension after investors triggered a historic sell-off. Victor stared at the screen in horror. His publicly traded company was collapsing. Stock prices plunged in real time. 30%, 42, 57. Each number struck like a hammer. One investor after another abandoned him. Not because they hated him, because uncertainty terrified markets. Victor whispered, This isn't possible. No one answered. He slowly looked toward Linyu. For the first time, there was no arrogance left in his eyes. Only confusion. You knew? She met his gaze. I knew pride always borrows tomorrow's punishment. You planned this. No, you did. I planned nothing. You declared the mirror fake. You rejected your own future. Victor opened his mouth to argue, but found no words. Because deep inside, he understood. She had never attacked him. She had never exposed him. She had never even defended herself. She had simply allowed him to speak. Everything afterward had been the consequence of his own choices. Outside the auction hall, sirens echoed through the city. Inside, the bidding crossed $5 billion. Yet no one seemed to care about the money anymore. Every person in the room had begun asking the same question. If one forgotten artifact could rewrite history, how many more had the world dismissed simply because the wrong expert declared them worthless? And somewhere in the crowd, unnoticed by almost everyone except me, May quietly closed her notebook. She smiled once, not with satisfaction, with concern, as though tonight's miracle had opened a door that should never have been unlocked. The first police vehicles arrived before the auction ended, not to arrest anyone, to control the thousands of people who had gathered outside Graves International after the live broadcast shattered viewing records across the world. Helicopters circled overhead. Reporters shouted into cameras. Every major news network displayed the same headline, "The Mirror That Challenged History." Inside the hall, however, no one was watching the news anymore. All eyes were fixed on Victor Harlan. He hadn't moved for nearly 10 minutes. His phone vibrated continuously. Lawyers, board members, investors, government officials. He ignored every call. At last, he answered one. Yes. Silence. His expression slowly changed. No. Another pause. That can't be right. His shoulders slumped. I understand. The call ended. He stared blankly at the dark screen in his hand. Professor Shaw stepped closer. What happened? Victor laughed weakly. My board removed me. No one reacted with satisfaction. Not even Lin Yu. A man who had spent 30 years believing himself untouchable had lost everything in a single night. No revenge could have been harsher than reality. Adrian quietly approached Victor. There are journalists waiting outside. Victor gave a bitter smile. I know. They'll ask whether I deliberately deceived collectors. I didn't. Adrian nodded. I believe you. Victor looked up in surprise. You do? I believe you convinced yourself you were never wrong. He paused. That is far more dangerous than lying. Victor lowered his head. For the first time since I had met him, he offered no defense. Meanwhile, the bidding reached $6 billion. A representative from a sovereign museum stood. Our institution withdraws. Gasps spread through the audience. Another collector withdrew. Then another. Within minutes, nearly half the bidders had stepped away. Daniel frowned. They're giving up? Adrian smiled. No. They finally understand. I already knew what he meant. No amount of money could truly purchase something that rewrote civilization itself. Owning it meant carrying impossible responsibility. Some fortunes were simply too heavy. Lin Yu slowly walked onto the stage. I have reached a decision. The room became perfectly still. I will not sell the mirror. No outrage followed. Only quiet acceptance. She continued. It belongs to history. Not to me. She turned toward Adrian. I ask only one thing. What? Create a foundation. For restoration. For forgotten civilizations. For every artifact dismissed because someone powerful refused to see. Adrian extended his hand. You have my word. She shook it once. The audience rose to its feet. Not because a sale had succeeded. Because greed had failed. Later that evening, most guests had already left. The auction hall finally became quiet. Only a handful of researchers remained. Professor Shaw approached Lin Yu carrying several ancient manuscripts. I've spent my entire career searching for certainty. He smiled sadly. Perhaps I should have searched for questions instead. She accepted the books. Questions keep history alive. Answers sometimes bury it. He laughed softly. I'll remember that. Near midnight, I finally unfolded the note May had given me. The elegant handwriting contained only a second sentence beneath the first. The first key awakens memory. The second awakens judgment. Nothing else. Footsteps echoed behind me. You read it. I turned. May stood in the empty corridor. Who wrote this? My teacher. Where is your teacher? She looked away. Missing. For how long? 11 years. I remained silent. She continued. He believed the heavenly witness wasn't unique. I've begun suspecting the same. Her expression darkened. Then you also understand the danger. I nodded slowly. If more artifacts exist, someone has been hiding them. Before either of us could continue, Lin Yu appeared at the end of the corridor. She looked at the folded note in my hand. So you finally know. You knew about this? I knew someone would eventually find us. May bowed respectfully. You recognized me. I recognized your patience. Lin Yu stepped closer. The mirror has done what it was meant to do. What now? I asked. She looked through the window toward the sleeping city. Now people will spend years arguing over ownership. Governments, museums, collectors, scholars. She smiled faintly. And history will quietly wait. The following morning, Victor Harlan voluntarily appeared before an international review committee. The hearing was broadcast live. Millions watched. No lawyer could restore authority that had been surrendered by reality. The committee chairman asked only one question. When you declared the mirror fake, did you examine every possibility? Victor closed his eyes. For several seconds he said nothing. Then he answered quietly. No, I examined only the possibility that agreed with my certainty. The room remained silent. I mistook confidence for truth. Those words spread across the world within minutes. Not because they excused him, because they condemned every expert who believed reputation mattered more than humility. His licenses were revoked. His galleries dissolved. His fortune disappeared into lawsuits and compensation funds. No one celebrated. His downfall no longer belonged to one man. It had become a lesson. That evening, Adrian officially announced the creation of the Forgotten Civilizations Restoration Foundation. Lin Yu donated the mirror to the foundation under one condition. No single nation, no single collector, no single institution would ever own it. It would belong to humanity. As reporters crowded around her, one asked the question everyone had been waiting for. Miss Lin, do you regret staying silent when everyone mocked you? She looked toward the cameras with the same calm expression she had worn since the beginning. If I had argued, they would only have defended their pride. She paused. But when consequences speak, people finally listen. Across the city, Victor watched the interview alone from a small rented apartment. He quietly turned off the television. For the first time in decades, he opened a history book not to prove himself right, but to learn. Winter arrived quietly. 3 months had passed since the night the bronze mirror transformed from an object of ridicule into humanity's most carefully protected historical artifact. The frenzy had faded. The arguments had not. Academic journals filled with competing theories. Governments debated international treaties. Universities organized emergency conferences. Every week brought another expert claiming to understand the heavenly witness. Every week, the mirror remained silent. It revealed nothing. Almost as if it had decided the world had learned enough, for now. The Forgotten Civilizations Restoration Foundation occupied a restored 19th-century observatory overlooking the river. Unlike Victor Harlan's old galleries, there were no velvet ropes designed to impress visitors. No extravagant chandeliers. No gold-plated plaques. Only quiet reading rooms, conservation laboratories, and walls covered with maps of forgotten trade routes and vanished kingdoms. Knowledge had replaced prestige. I stood inside the restoration workshop, carefully cleaning a cracked ceramic tablet recovered from a collapsed mountain shrine. A young conservator beside me sighed. I've been staring at this inscription for 6 hours. And I still can't read it. You aren't supposed to. She looked confused. What do you mean? I smiled. If history surrendered its secrets immediately, our work would already be over. She laughed softly. You sound like Miss Lin. That's because she keeps correcting me. Across the room, Lin Yu was teaching a group of graduate researchers. She never lectured from a podium. Instead, she placed 3 nearly identical bronze fragments on a wooden table. Which one is authentic? The students immediately began debating. This one. No, the corrosion is older. I disagree. 20 minutes later, every opinion conflicted with another. Lin Yu finally asked, how many of you touched them? No one raised a hand. You argued longer than you observed. The room fell silent. She continued, assumptions are louder than evidence. The students quietly approached the table. Only then did they notice tiny details everyone had overlooked. I watched from across the room. She wasn't teaching archaeology. She was teaching humility. Later that afternoon, Adrian entered carrying several sealed envelopes. You've both been invited. To what? I asked. The International Heritage Summit. I expected that. He smiled. You haven't heard the location. Where? The old Imperial Archive. Lin Yu looked up. Impossible. It has been closed for 70 years. Adrian nodded. Not anymore. The council voted unanimously. He placed one invitation in front of each of us. Apparently, the world has decided history deserves another chance. That evening, I found May alone inside the Foundation library. Her notebook had grown noticeably thicker, still collecting fragments. She nodded. I've connected 16 references to Heaven's Sight, and they all point toward the same place. I sat opposite her. Where? She hesitated. I don't know. That's unusually honest. She smiled. It's also unusually frustrating. She opened her notebook. Instead of maps, she showed me copies of ancient poems. Each contained nearly identical lines. The first witness remembers. The second measures. The third forgives. I frowned. There are 3. Maybe. Or maybe those words mean something entirely different. She closed the notebook. The more I learn, the less certain I become. I couldn't help smiling. Congratulations. You've finally become a real historian. She laughed. I think Miss Lin would approve. The International Heritage Summit drew scholars from more than 80 countries. Unlike the auction months earlier, no one arrived hoping to buy anything. They came hoping to understand. The atmosphere felt completely different. Less competitive. More thoughtful. Even disagreements sounded respectful. The mirror had changed more than academic theory. It had changed people. On the opening morning, Professor Shaw delivered the keynote address. The man who had once defended Victor's certainty now stood before thousands of researchers with quiet humility. My greatest discovery was not an artifact. It was my own ignorance. The audience listened without interruption. For 40 years, I believed expertise meant possessing answers. He smiled gently. I was wrong. Expertise begins the moment we become willing to ask better questions. A standing ovation followed. Not because his words were dramatic, but because everyone in the room knew how difficult they had been to speak. After the ceremony, I wandered through the restored Imperial Archive. Rows upon rows of manuscripts stretched into the distance. Many had never been fully translated. Some had never even been opened. A young volunteer approached me. Excuse me. Yes. I wanted to thank you. For what? If that mirror hadn't appeared, these records would still be gathering dust. She gestured toward dozens of researchers working quietly at long wooden tables. My grandfather spent his whole life trying to convince people forgotten history mattered. Her eyes glistened. He would have loved this. I looked around the hall. Hundreds of people had gathered. Not around the mirror. Around books. Around broken pottery. Around faded ink. Around questions. Perhaps that was the mirror's greatest miracle. It hadn't merely revealed the past. It had restored curiosity. That evening, Lin Yu and I stood outside the archive overlooking the ancient city walls. Snow drifted slowly through the lantern light. You've been unusually quiet, I said. She smiled faintly. I've been listening. To what? The city. I laughed softly. It doesn't speak. It does. She watched the falling snow. People think history lives inside objects. They're mistaken. Where does it live? In choices. The choice to preserve. The choice to question. The choice to admit we might be wrong. I thought about Victor. About Professor Shaw. About Adrian. About every person whose life had changed because one woman refused to argue with arrogance. You knew this would happen. No. She shook her head. I only knew consequences are patient. She turned toward the illuminated archive behind us. They never hurry. They never forget. Far below, the city continued its ordinary rhythm. Children laughed in snowy streets. Students hurried between libraries. Researchers carried fragile manuscripts with careful hands. Life moved forward, not because history had finally revealed every answer, but because people had finally learned how to seek them. Spring arrived with rain. Nearly a year had passed since an unknown woman had quietly walked into an auction hall carrying what everyone believed was a worthless bronze mirror. The world no longer called her unknown. Yet she refused every interview that tried to turn her into a legend. The story isn't about me, she always said. It's about what people choose when certainty is challenged. Because of that, public fascination slowly transformed into something healthier. Respect. The Forgotten Civilizations Restoration Foundation had expanded into an international network. Young conservators trained beside veteran historians. Artifacts once dismissed as insignificant were re-examined with fresh eyes. Thousands proved ordinary. A handful did not. Each discovery reinforced the same lesson. The greatest obstacle to truth had never been lack of evidence. It had been unquestioned pride. One rainy afternoon, Adrian entered the Foundation's archive carrying a weathered wooden chest. I think you'll want to see this. He placed it carefully on the central examination table. No sender? I asked. None. No return address. Only an old wax seal marked the lid. Not a family crest. Not an institution. A simple symbol. An eye surrounded by 7 stars. May's expression immediately changed. I've seen that. Where? In my teacher's journal. Lin Yu remained unusually quiet. She traced the faded seal with one finger. They finally answered. You knew someone would. I hoped. Adrian frowned. Who are they? Lin Yu looked toward the rain-covered windows. The people who understood that knowledge survives only when no one owns it. The chest contained no gold, no jewels, no miraculous artifact. Only hundreds of handwritten journals, letters, maps, research notes collected across nearly 3 centuries. Each generation had added its own observations before quietly passing everything to the next. The final page contained only one sentence. History belongs to those willing to doubt themselves. Professor Shaw slowly removed his glasses. I spent 40 years chasing objects. He smiled. The real treasure was wisdom. Weeks later, the Foundation hosted an exhibition unlike any before it. The Heavenly Witness mirror stood in the center of the hall, not inside an extravagant throne-like display, not beneath dramatic lighting, simply protected behind clear glass. Around it stood dozens of ordinary artifacts, broken bowls, rusted tools, fragments of forgotten walls. Children stopped longer before those simple objects than the priceless mirror itself. One little boy tugged at his mother's sleeve. Why is that cracked bowl important? His mother smiled uncertainly. I don't know. A volunteer overheard them. It belonged to a village that disappeared after saving thousands of refugees. The boy stared at the bowl. So, it's important because of people? The volunteer smiled. Exactly. I looked toward Lin Yu. She had heard the exchange. She quietly closed her eyes for a moment. No applause could ever equal that conversation. The mirror had fulfilled its purpose. People were finally looking beyond value, toward meaning. Late that evening, after the museum had closed, only 4 of us remained. Lin Yu, May, Adrian, and me. Outside, the city lights reflected across the river. Inside, the Heavenly Witness rested in complete silence. For several minutes, none of us spoke. Finally, May broke the silence. My teacher always believed there would be a final question. What question? Adrian asked. She looked toward the mirror. If history remembers everything, who remembers us? No one answered immediately, because there wasn't a simple answer. Lin Yu slowly walked toward the glass enclosure. For the first time in many months, the mirror responded. Its dark surface shimmered. No golden symbols appeared. No visions. Only reflections. Our own reflections. Perfectly clear. Lin Yu smiled gently. I think that's the answer. I stepped beside her. It remembers those willing to remember others. She nodded. History isn't built by extraordinary people. It's built by ordinary people whose choices refuse to disappear. The mirror slowly returned to darkness. It never awakened again. Not that night. Not in the years that followed. Some journalists called it a disappointment. Researchers called it a mystery. Lin Yu simply called it enough. Years passed. Professor Shaw retired and devoted his remaining years to mentoring young historians instead of pursuing recognition. Adrian transformed the Foundation into the world's leading center for cultural preservation, refusing every attempt by governments or corporations to claim exclusive control. May eventually completed her teacher's unfinished research. She never claimed certainty, only progress. As for Victor Harlan, his name gradually disappeared from headlines. He never returned to the luxury galleries that had once worshipped him. Instead, he accepted a modest position cataloging neglected artifacts in a small regional museum. Visitors rarely recognized him. He preferred it that way. One afternoon, a young intern nervously showed him a cracked clay figurine. I think it's worthless. Victor looked at it for a long time. Then he smiled with quiet humility. I thought that once. He carefully accepted the figurine. Let's examine it together. That single sentence redeemed more than any public apology ever could. Many years later, I returned alone to the Foundation after retirement. The exhibition halls were filled with children asking questions their teachers couldn't immediately answer. I smiled. That was exactly how it should be. The bronze mirror remained where Lin Yu had left it. Silent, patient, unchanged. A small bronze plaque beneath the display carried no mention of its price. No mention of the billion-dollar bids. No mention of the world's greatest auction. Only a single inscription. Truth never needed a louder voice. It only needed someone who refused to interrupt the consequences. I stood there for a long time before quietly leaving the hall. Outside, the evening sun bathed the old observatory in warm golden light. Behind me, generations of curious voices echoed through its corridors. Ahead of me, history continued, not as something finished, but as something still waiting to be understood. And for the first time in my life, I realized that heaven's greatest gift had never been the power to see hidden treasures. It had been the wisdom to remain silent until the truth could speak for itself.